Not this shit again. You've got to be kidding me.
Dance, monkey, dance.
Shell Shock can kiss my ass.
I should just charge you to have to ride in the car and just suck ideas off my brain. So I'm constantly going, no, stop that, put that down, don't touch that, take that out of your mouth.
For real this time. You
Yes.
ready? For real?
Yes.
All right, here we go. Today is Monday, September 29th, 2014, and this is episode 86 of the Defensive Security Podcast. My name is Jerry Bell, and joining me tonight, as usual, is Mr. Andrew Callett.
Good evening, Jerry. I'm glad we survived DerbyCon.
We did. That was a blast.
It was a good time. I'm sure we'll talk about it in general, but yeah, highly recommended. Go to DerbyCon next year. That's all I can tell you.
Buy your tickets early, by the way, and book your room early. It's a nicer experience when you're actually in the hotel. I suspect. I don't know.
I will counter that slightly. I wasn't kept awake by the party. Well,
that's a good point. Just so the listeners have that context. On Saturday night, I went to bed about 1:30 in the morning, and I put my earplugs in. I was 5 floors up on the other side of the hotel, and I could still hear the music quite loudly. So, yeah, it was quite a party. Yeah. But by the way, I have to say there were a fair number of defensive security listeners there. So it was really great to be able to spend some time at the bar with all of them, and to all of those of you who were there, thank you very much. It was great meeting you. Hopefully we get to meet again.
Yeah, absolutely. That was awesome. That made DerbyCon even that much cooler to meet folks who listen to the show and were cool people in general to hang out and talk to, and we had an excuse to meet, which was an awesome side effect of the podcast.
Yeah, definitely. And then we had the surprise three-way with Securabit and Down the Rabbit Hole.
Yeah, those surprise three-ways just sneak right up on you.
Every time.
But we did. We got invited to participate, and hopefully you'll hear it at some point in the near future, and listen to 4 podcasters try to not step on each other with microphones.
was really cool. I like doing that a lot. That was a lot of fun. Hopefully,
yeah, and I was flattered and honored to be asked to join. So that was nice.
Me too. So thank you to Raph and to Chris for inviting us. That was nice. And I should say, they actually invited you. I was just the awkward tag-along. So, but hey, what can I say?
I wasn't going to point that out.
I know. That's why I'm here, I'm honest.
So, hey, there's been a wee bit of news.
Yeah.
Last we recorded.
That is for sure. So, of course, we're talking about Shell Shock.
And you may note that Jerry sounds a little more tired than usual.
Yes, it has been a very long day for me.
Yes, and we got back from DerbyCon relatively late last night, and, the world was imploding. So we apologize if we're not as up and, peppy as usual.
And yeah, and it continues to implode. So I suspect most people understand what Shell Shock is, but I'll just give a little bit of a background here, right? So this looks and feels a whole lot like Heartbleed from about, I guess it was almost 6 months ago now. In the respect that it is a very prolific vulnerability, or I should say it's a vulnerability in a very prolific piece of software. And we're going to be dealing with this for a while. And I think that's one of the key points for me. And not only are we going to be dealing with it for a while, we're going to have to keep probably revisiting it as we learn more, or the industry learns more about this. So here's the deal. Bash, as hopefully most people know, is a shell. It's a Unix-like shell, or a shell that's commonly used on Unix systems like Linux and other flavors. And in certain contexts, it's possible to pass it some specially crafted code in the form of environment variables, and those environment variables end up getting executed as actual commands, right? So that's not the actual intention. That's not what's normally supposed to happen, but that's the net of what happens in this shell shock attack. The primary way this is manifesting itself is on web servers. And it's not all web servers. It's a potentially relatively narrow set that use CGI. So as opposed to the, let's say PHP, or even ModPerl, right? This is a situation where you have a standalone executable script or binary that the web server is making a call to. And what happens is that the client, the web browser, is essentially passing a series of HTTP parameters, and those parameters could be the cookies, they could be post parameters, get parameters, lots of different things. Actually, any parameter that can be passed from the browser into the web server can be stuffed with this specially formatted code. And what happens is in the processing of that request, the web server passes those HTTP parameters to Bash as environment variables, which then get executed, and they allow they allow our friendly attacker to run whatever the heck they want on your server.
With very little footprint.
Yes, it's kind of difficult to actually tell. Really, all you're going to see in your web server logs is a call to, let's say the CGI bin. Generally, the parameters are not passed, so that's into the logs, I should say. So that's a pretty difficult thing. And again, it kind of smacks of Heartbleed, where we didn't see logs there either. The big difference here is that now you, unlike with Heartbleed, which was just a read-only kind of exploit, now this gives attackers a footprint on your system.
So they can pretty much execute any command that in essence, probably the web daemon is running as, whatever permission level, probably user space, most likely. I mean, if you're running your web server as root, wow, that's bad. But I guess that's possible. You could be doing that. So since the web server is invoking Bash, it's running at whatever permission level the web server is running at. And we're also seeing other vectors as well. So, but if we stick with the web vector for a moment, anybody who's got CGI bin, apparently, is the primary vector we're hitting right now. And we're seeing all sorts of really, really, really clever payloads already starting to emerge. Everything from reverse shells, automated click fraud, huge DDoS botnets, you name it. We're seeing all sorts of stuff now. It's really up to the imagination of somebody who can throw something on a command line of a Unix box via this vector.
Yeah, absolutely. So just kind of carrying on what you were saying about some other attack vectors here. So one of them that has been getting a lot of press recently is DHCP on Linux. And so this is actually a little scary for those of you who run Linux on the workstation and you happen to have a vulnerable version of Bash running. Essentially what happens is DHCP gives DHCP servers, the DHCP client gives DHCP servers the ability to pass different parameters, which again get interpreted as environment variables into, processed by Bash, again allowing a DHCP server to run arbitrary commands. And the reason this is particularly concerning is that, number one, the DHCP client is usually running at a very high permission, sometimes even root, probably often root, and it's really trivial for an attacker to launch. So let's think about the case of the coffee shop, right? So I'm a bad person. I can set up my rogue wireless access point that looks an awful lot like Starbucks, and you connect to my Wi-Fi with your Linux workstation. I hand you an IP address with some malformed parameters, and now I have essentially root access to your Linux system, which is totally awesome. The other one that's been discussed a lot is SSH. This is not quite as bad as other ones. So SSH allows you as an administrator to configure a set of commands that someone who logs in is restricted to. There's this parameter called force command in the sshd.conf file, and this bug essentially allows someone who otherwise has the ability to log in, so they have a username and password to SSH in. This allows them effectively to escape that. They can bypass the limitation on what commands they can run. So, it's certainly not great, but it's not as bad as some of the others. So, as you mentioned, there's a fair number of things that are being done with it now. I've got some ideas for other things that I foresee. I tried to come up with 10, but I couldn't get there. So I'll just give you the 7 that I got. So I think one thing I expect to see is mass watering hole attacks. So given that this affects web servers, most likely I think we're going to see web servers being compromised and including malicious iframe redirects to exploit kits. I think we will probably see database dumps, kind of like eBay and others, where they're dropping the whatever's in the database that the web application is talking to, because now these attackers most likely have access to the code, which probably has access to the the user ID and the database connection and whatnot. So that's another altering the web application to inject some custom logic, like let's say stealing credit cards. So if you've got an e-commerce site, I could potentially, if I spent enough time, I could alter the content of your application to make a copy of credit cards being processed and send them to me. Hijacking accounts. The favorite one I came up with was Bitcoin mining.
Nice.
And then web mass. Think mass web defacements, right? You could conceivably write a script. Not you necessarily, but some random bad person could write.
Are you saying I couldn't?
I'm saying that you wouldn't, because you're a nice
skills.
No, because you're a nice person.
Okay, carry on.
And so anyway, bad person could conceivably write a script that would go out and essentially perform mass defacements of websites. So if it can find a way in, it defaces the website. And the other one I thought of, which would be really bad, and I hope I'm not giving people ideas, but think about CryptoLocker website. CryptoLocker the content on a website. Yeah, that's kind of evil.
Well, so you'd have to drop a dropper on it, which is trivial. You then have to escalate privilege, most likely.
Well, maybe if it's
It depends on what It depends on what, I guess, the CGI bin or the web server is running at, what permission level, and what files it could get to.
Yep.
As a result.
That's right.
Yeah, they're all. I personally think we'll just see a lot more botnets and DDoS and spammers. And
I think Bitcoin mining.
You just want to do some Bitcoin references.
Well, apparently that's the thing to talk about.
So the bottom line is this is nasty, and nobody saw it coming.
Yeah, and so I've been thinking about what this means, and one of the things that struck me is this particular exploit takes us back to the need to get, to really work on local system security. And I really think I don't want to say it's a lost art, but I think it's certainly a dying art, right? Intra-system security, getting in there and really locking things down, because, again, I think we're starting to think about, the server itself as the boundary, and you don't let people in who don't deserve to get in. And so you're not necessarily prioritizing privilege escalation vulnerabilities real highly, and, or looking at opportunities for weak configurations, let's say world writable scripts that run as a root, or, things like that would give an attacker who has the ability to get a presence on your system, relatively easy ways to elevate their access. Not that it's great if they are able to get on your system, even if you have all those mitigations in place, but, at least I think this kind of highlights the need for that kind of discipline.
Yeah, I would agree. So let's talk about mitigating this, and then what can we do to not get blindsided by these sorts of, favorite word coming, black swan events in the future, do you think?
Oh, black swan.
So from a response standpoint, there's a whole bunch of stuff going on. The problem is Bash is everywhere, and we're still discovering ways to exploit this. So researchers are going crazy looking at this. We have found now, as far as I know, a total of 4 big bugs in Bash beyond just this initial one. We have issued a number of subsequent patches that the initial patch didn't even fix this properly. Then more problems were found and more patches were released. And that may still continue. We are finally getting the many eyes looking at this code that we were always promised with open source. Yes, that was snarky. So obviously we need to patch. Granted, that's an easy one. However, one thing that happened with this and Heartbleed is, what if you can't patch yet? What if your vendor hasn't supplied you with a patch yet, or whatever reason? And in our long, boring drive back from DerbyCon, in our half-vegetative state, we came up with some ideas and did some research. And you summarized some of these in a blog post today. Do you want to kind of run down some of those?
Yeah, so I was thinking, at a very high level, when things like this come up, you've only got a couple of basic things you can do, right? You can accept the risk, of continuing to operate as is until you get a patch. Because ultimately that's one of the big problems, right? With this is we don't have a patch, or at least we're pretty confident that we don't have a patch that completely covers it. So we can accept the risk that we're just we're gonna live with it and deal with whatever happens. We can go the opposite way and just disconnect it, right? And then the third one is something else, something in the middle. And there's kind of an infinite variety or continuum of things that you can do in that spectrum. And I think that's probably where most people are really going to be focusing. And it occurred to me that whatever you're going to do in that third case requires some intelligence to really understand what you've got going on in your environment and to be able to figure out what the most logical thing to do is. And so some of the ideas we were kicking around, and you brought up the mod security rules. Let's look at what Apache can do. Is there something that you can do with Apache?
Yeah, at a very fundamental level, we were kicking around, okay, if the problem is Bash and we can't fix Bash, what's passing the commands to Bash? And can we look at that?
Right.
And we found, or you found that, yeah, actually, Apache issued a bunch of stuff. So, kind of the thought process behind that is, just to give the 10,000-foot overview, is if we can't fix Bash yet, what is wrapping around this that we can fix in this case? So going back to DHCP, maybe if Bash is still broken, maybe, and I don't know if there is, maybe there's a patch for the DHCP client on Linux that prevents these parameters from flowing through. So we have to get a little creative, right? And think about how can we mitigate from other angles.
Yep, or switch to a different shell if that's possible. That's and I think these are going to be possible to different degrees based on, again, the specific implementations that you have, because not everybody's going to have the ability to do all these things.
Right.
But again, it's going to take someone with some intelligence that evaluate, what is your risk? What kinds of control opportunities do you have to implement? Another one we came up with was IPS and WAF. We know that we have most IPS vendors are running around with their flags up saying, oh my gosh, we protected this for the last 15 years or whatever. And then, I suppose WAF is a similar kind of thing. I don't think they're making those kinds of incredible claims, but it's an opportunity to leverage some of your other infrastructure to help protect. Again, I am not a big fan of relying on those things as primary methods of control. But if you got nothing else, if you got no other choice.
Well, you're in a reaction mode at this point, right? You're just trying to mitigate and stem the damage. And so this doesn't help you necessarily with the next time, right? We are talking about fighting the last battle at this point. We acknowledge that. But the concept is don't get blinded by you just have to wait for a patch. Look at the other tools in your environment that are also examining the same or handling the same traffic and see if you can limit this. Now, the challenge is with this particular one is the environment variables and parameters that you can throw into this can be incredibly variable. So no pun intended. So it's not like it's a single easy signature to write. You're almost doing a bounds checking signature. If you're looking at a WAF or you're looking at an IPS rule or something like that. So that's a tough one, right? You got to be careful there, and you got to make sure that you're not dropping any legitimate traffic, or hey, you might decide it's okay to drop that legitimate traffic in your environment to stop this attack. Going back to Apache, just to be thorough, there was a bunch of stuff Apache put out. You should go do some research on Apache if you got that. They had IP table rules, they had mod security rules, they had all sorts of stuff to mitigate this from Apache. So good on them. The other thing that occurs to me is you really need somebody who, A, isn't dogged down responding to tickets on this, but who can architecturally look at the big picture, understand all of this traffic flow, understand this data flow, have enough working knowledge of all these different pieces and how they work together to understand effective mitigations. And I think that is actually a relatively tough thing to find for a lot of organizations. With all that background and knowledge and skill set, right? This is now where we start to get the difference between people who understand security and understand networking and understand data flow and separate them from the folks who understand technically how to run security products.
I think that's very well said. And, I think the other item I wanted to point out, and this was also part of the thing I wrote up was, there's a big difference between patch management and vulnerability management. And I think a lot of organizations do patch management and essentially kind of wring their hands when there isn't a patch available. And so I think there's a lot of hand-wringing right now going on because we don't generally have the capability that you described to do the vulnerability management. And by the way, another thing that is really bothering me is not everything that has bash is exploitable. It might all be vulnerable. Bash on all those systems may very well be vulnerable, right? You can log in and run the little one-line command, and sure enough, you'll see that it's vulnerable. But not every system is exploitable because it doesn't run DHCP, it doesn't run a web server in CGI bin mode. Those are kind of nuanced things, but they're important. If you have a large estate of systems that have to be addressed, this can be an important point to help you prioritize what needs to be done. And I think prioritization is also generally a very important thing. This very much like Heartbleed is primarily, except for, again, the DHCP consideration, is very much an internet. The primary threat is going to be coming in from the internet. Certainly it can emanate from inside your network, but every script kiddie and their dog is going to be hammering your web server right now with this thing. So that's where a lot of the traffic's going to be coming from. That's where you should probably be focusing your effort right now.
I think that's fair. So do we want to tackle how would you handle this in the future? How do we learn from this to get ready for the next unforeseen, unpredictable mass vulnerability, which I am calling trench foot, for the record.
Just keeping on with the World War I references,
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Awesome. Well, you just got to get out there. You got to keep hitting refresh on Twitter. So when you see it, you can just start. This is called trench foot because apparently, I don't know if you've noticed, but there are people out there fighting over who named this thing. So, but anyhow,
Well,
that's totally.
You heard it here first. For whatever the future CVE is,
It's trench foot. Great.
for this completely unknown and unforecasted mass vulnerability that will happen at some point between now and I'm going to say 2 years from now.
Yeah.
I'm calling it right here.
Great.
All right. Anyway.
Anyhow, it's difficult to talk about things in the abstract, but if you kind of extrapolate from what we've seen in Heartbleed and now this, there probably are some commonalities, and I'm going to be shooting from the hip here. I haven't spent a ton of time thinking about this, but certainly thinking about what kind of monitoring capability do you need to be able to identify if a system has been compromised quickly? And I know we talk about this to death in the context of other things and other stories, but I think this kind of goes back to the central theme that you can't stop everything. And so you really, failing everything else, you need to know when your system has been compromised, and you need to be able to detect that's happened really quickly. So that, I think, I think this just goes, it's another log on the fire for that. Another point I would say is to build your environment in a defendable manner. Having the opportunity to have different kinds of control points, whether it's a WAF or an IPS, they're not always going to be useful, but sometimes they will be. And being able to, to step in and use those in an effective way is, that's an important thing. In the article I wrote, I think it's really important to have someone or some people on your staff who are able to think clear-headedly about what's going on, what the actual risks are, and what specific plans, given the context of what's going on, your organization should be executing on. I think that's a really important one. Again, it's not all about technology. We need some thought behind this. I don't know. What about you?
Well, what I hear you saying in the last one is separate the operational response from, the strategic leadership thought process.
Yes.
Get somebody out of the fire drill so they can really take a step back and think through the problem.
Yes, exactly right.
Yeah. I agree with a lot of the points you made. I think the more tools you have in your tool chest that you can alter traffic or manipulate traffic, the better. The other thing that I think a lot about is having really good inventory management over everything in your environment so you know what's out there. You can assess clearly, all right, this is targeting, I don't know, Windows 7 Service Pack 1 with patch XYZ. And, it's going after its IPv4 stack. That would be a huge problem.
I think that's an excellent one, and I know I think in this particular one, it's a little easier, but I think in the Harpley case, I know a lot of companies struggled mightily to figure out where all they had OpenSSL, because OpenSSL was in freaking everything, you know?
Well, in this case, I would bet there's a lot of folks who don't even know if Bash is integrated, in their embedded system, because we haven't really talked about embedded systems much. We've been talking about kind of full-blown, built-out Linux boxes. You never know. I would project we're going to see vulnerable systems 10 years from now on this one. So, but for an enterprise, and talking about enterprise response, I think the more knowledge you have that you can grab at your fingertips about what's installed where, the better off you are. And there are really good tools out there, especially on the Windows and Mac side, that do an excellent job of inventorying every single thing out there and allowing you to call that and report on that. Little tougher on the server side for Linux, but they're out there. I think fundamentally we need to shift our mindset from, we can protect ourselves with patching and protect ourselves with gear, and understand that these things are going to happen again and again and again, and come up with a way to cope with that in a way that our hair isn't on fire every single time. I don't have perfect answers to that, but I know what we're doing right now is not viable long term.
Yeah, I mean, just to expand on what you just said, because I think it's a really important point, that this is, when we encountered Heartbleed, I think we all called it a black swan, and we had a good chuckle and had a beer and went on with our lives. But now with this, I think we can kind of see that this is not going to be an isolated incident, and I do fully expect that this thing is going to be dogging us for a very long time, like you just mentioned. And what concerns me is that this may have opened up a new frontier, right? And whatever, right? My point is, we're seeing a lot of really clever people looking at Bash now and saying, ho, nobody else thought about exploiting the environment variables this way, and so now we've seen, I think, 6 different CVEs come out, and hey, we might see 10 more. We have no clue what's going to be, what's going to happen. But one of the things I wonder is if this is going to reinvigorate people, researchers and bad guys even, on things that we just never conceived of before as being potential vulnerabilities. And so now, I don't think this was on anybody's radar. People didn't really think about, hey, I wonder about that environment variable passing between, when you take a step back, it's so simple. This is the kind of problem that we've been dealing with, like on PHP, and we've had jokes about, user data input problems in PHP for a long time, and that's just been a thorn in PHP's side, and nobody really ever conceived of Bash having this kind of problem. And I've got to believe that a whole bunch of clever people are looking around all over the place saying, what else is like this? Not necessarily Bash, but what else is kind of like this where we haven't really thought of this before? And it's kind of a scary thing, because we're seeing these really major problems on very pervasive pieces of technology like Bash. I mean, and I think just to close out that point, we've got to stop pretending like these are just complete one-offs. We've got to think about an effective way to handle this so that when the next one comes along, we're not making it up as we go. We're not making up our response.
100% agree. And, we kind of did a bit of a thought experiment of how would you design an environment and infrastructure that's completely resilient to some sort of completely unforecasted mass vulnerability? And we're not coming up with a lot of good answers. There is one other thing I wanted to bring up about this problem. So let's say you have outsourced your server maintenance or box maintenance or whatever to a managed service provider. In other words, you rely on a third party to handle patching for this. Here's something kind of scary. They're built to run at a normal load for normal days of normal amount of patching and normal amount of administration. When we have a mass issue like this, it quickly oversubscribes third parties who are doing your patch management, because they're not just doing it for you, they're doing it for all their customers with a very limited staff. So that is an interesting risk that we incur when we outsource, as opposed to spreading that load of this mass event over discrete IT teams at every organization. We're centralizing that.
Yep. I think that's very well said. And I suspect at some point there's probably a counter benefit of, now when you have that kind of team, they've applied by the time they get to your servers, conceivably they've applied the patch, hundreds of times. So maybe they're really good at it. But I think the resource problem is a really good point when everybody on the internet is having to patch, at the same time. That becomes a real big problem, and you could definitely see some exposure there. I honestly don't know what kinds of contingency plans different outsourcers might or might not have, but it might be a good question to ask. Your outsourcer, how would you handle that? Maybe they have a good answer. I don't know, but it's a really great point.
Thanks.
And so I think that concludes what I wanted to cover.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot we could talk about at DerbyCon. I think we'll do that next show. And I want to review some of the videos of some of the talks I didn't get a chance to go to. But this is the hot topic of the week. So maybe we'll return to normal news next week. But
yeah, but in the meantime, I'll leave you with a little teaser about one of the talks that both you and I liked, and that was I forget the name of it, but it was an incident response talk by some people from GE.
Yeah,
and I think the links to the videos are being posted right now. So I'll try to find the link to that video and stick it in the show notes. It's really a very well worthwhile watching. And with that, we will like we said, we'll do more DerbyCon talk next time. But we wanted to get, even in our tired, cranky state, we wanted to get something out.
Hey, if you're out there fighting this and you've got some good stories, we'd love to hear them. We're happy to keep you anonymous, but we'd love to hear some news from the trenches on shell shock. So drop us a line. Good point.
And with that, if you have any other questions, or again some reports from the trenches, send us an email to info@defensivesecurity.org. You can find the show notes and back episodes, whatnot, on our website, www.defensivesecurity.org. You can follow the show on Twitter @DefensiveSec. You can follow Mr. Callett on Twitter @Lurg, me on Twitter @MaliciousLink. With that, we will catch you again next week. Take care.